The dog walked into the clinic like he owned it. 200 pounds of muscle, scar tissue, and military training. And every person in that waiting room took a step back. Every person except her. She sat in her wheelchair near the window, the one everyone pretended not to see. And when that massive German shepherd locked eyes on her across the crowded room, he stopped breathing. The handler grabbed the leash. Staff members froze. The dog wasn't growling. He was trembling, like he recognized something. Like 5 years of war and blood and gunfire had just collapsed into a single moment in a small clinic in Willow Creek, Montana. She reached out her hand, and the dog that had survived 3 combat deployments lowered his scarred head and wept. If you're new here, subscribe now. Drop your city in the comments so I can see how far this story has traveled. Hit that like button because what happens next will break you open in the best possible way. Don't you dare leave. The rain had been falling since Tuesday. By Thursday morning, it hadn't let up. Just settled into that low gray permanence that Montana does in early November, where the clouds sit so close to the ground, you feel like you're living inside them. The kind of weather that makes small towns feel smaller, that makes the distance between one person and another feel like it has weight. Willow Creek sat in a valley between 2 ridgelines that blocked most of the afternoon light, even in summer. In November, it was dark by 4. The Bridger Rehabilitation and Recovery Center occupied what used to be a county hospital on the north end of Main Street. 3 stories of pale brick with aluminum window frames that fogged over in the cold, a parking lot that flooded every spring, and an interior that smelled like antiseptic and old coffee no matter how many times the maintenance crew mopped. It wasn't a bad place. It just wasn't a good one either. Amelia Carter had been coming here 5 days a week for 7 months. She arrived at 8:45 every morning in the same dark blue accessible van driven by a man named Gerald who never talked before 9 and always had a Country One 05 station playing at a volume just slightly too loud to ignore. She wheeled herself through the front entrance, signed in at the desk, and made her way to the physical therapy wing in the East Corridor. Past the reception area with its motivational posters that were starting to peel at the corners, past the vending machine that ate quarters without apology, past the row of chairs where the waiting patients sat and stared at their phones or at the floor or at her. Always at her. Not all of them. But enough. There was a language in the way people looked at someone in a wheelchair that most able-bodied people didn't realize they were speaking. It wasn't always cruel. Sometimes it was just absent. Like the wheelchair subtracted something from the equation of her personhood, reduced her to a category rather than a woman, disabled, tragic, needs help. Look away. Amelia had stopped being angry about it around month 3. What replaced the anger was something quieter and harder to name. Not acceptance, exactly, more like a cold familiarity with the shape of it. She was 25 years old. She had brown hair she kept in a braid because it was easier that way, eyes that were a dark gray-green that her mother used to call storm-colored, and hands that were strong from 7 months of pushing her own wheels everywhere she was able. She wore the same kind of clothes most days, dark jeans, a thermal shirt layered under a canvas jacket, trail runners on feet that couldn't feel the ground beneath them. She brought a battered paperback in the bag hanging from the back of her chair. She drank black coffee from a stainless steel thermos. She did not ask for help unless she had to. Her injury was T6 incomplete, a spinal cord trauma at the 6th thoracic vertebra, sustained 18 months ago when a drunk driver ran a red light at an intersection in Billings and hit the passenger side of a car she was riding in at 62 miles per hour. The driver of the other vehicle walked away with a dislocated shoulder. Amelia spent 9 days in intensive care and 3 months in acute rehabilitation before transitioning to outpatient therapy here, in the town where she'd grown up, where her aunt lived, where the only apartment she could afford that was accessible enough to manage was a converted first-floor unit above a dry cleaning shop on Elm Street. She didn't dwell on the calculus of that, or she tried not to. Her PT was a woman named Sandra Reeves, 50-something, practical, and unsentimental in the way that good physical therapists tended to be. Not cold, but honest. She didn't tell Amelia she was going to walk again. She told her they were going to work on what her nervous system could still do, and that the goal was function, not miracle. Amelia appreciated that more than she could say. This particular Thursday morning, she was 15 minutes into a mat exercise when she heard the commotion in the main lobby. Not loud, more like a shift in pressure, the kind of collective pause that a room full of people makes when something unexpected walks in. She ignored it for a while. Sandra was guiding her through a prone extension, stomach down on the mat, pressing her palms against the surface and lifting her upper torso. And Amelia had learned to tunnel her attention during these sessions, to block out the ambient noise of the clinic and focus on the specific conversation between her muscles and her brain, which was still, 18 months later, an imperfect one. Some signals got through, others didn't. The ones that did arrived like voices through bad radio reception, present but fragmented. "Push through it," Sandra said. Amelia pushed. Then the doors to the physical therapy wing swung open. She didn't see him immediately. She was still face down on the mat, arms trembling with effort, and the first thing she registered was the sound. Not footsteps, but the specific rhythm of a working dog moving on linoleum. 4-beat, deliberate, heavy. Then Sandra made a sound that wasn't quite a word. Amelia turned her head. The dog was enormous. That was the first thing, the sheer scale of him. German Shepherd, but built like a different order of animal than the breed usually suggested. His coat was the standard black and tan, but darker than average, and his frame was broad across the shoulders in a way that spoke of years of physical conditioning rather than the soft domesticity of a pet. He wore a tan tactical harness with a handle on the back and several pouches along the sides, the kind of rig that working military dogs were fitted with. A leash ran from the harness to the hand of the man walking beside him. The man was tall, 6'2", maybe 6'3", with the kind of lean, economical build that came from years of being asked to carry things over long distances. Dark hair cut short, a jaw that needed shaving, wearing civilian clothes that somehow looked like a uniform anyway. Late 30s, maybe. There was a quality to the way he moved through the space. Not aggressive, but aware. Like someone who had spent a long time in rooms where the exits mattered. He paused just inside the doorway and scanned the PT wing the way Amelia suspected he scanned every room he walked into. Quickly, systematically, logging positions and distances and variables without appearing to do anything at all. His eyes landed on the desk at the far end where the PT coordinator, a young man named Tyler, was standing with his mouth slightly open. "Commander Logan Hayes," the man said, not loud, clear. "I have an 8 o'clock consult with Dr. Reeves." Tyler blinked. "Dr. Sandra Reeves? She's with a patient right now." "I can see that." He didn't move. Sandra straightened. She was already moving toward them, pulling off a latex glove. "Commander Hayes, I was told 9... I'm sorry, let me... 8 o'clock, he said again, without accusation. Just correction. "Right. Yes. My mistake." She looked at Amelia. "Give me a few minutes." Amelia sat up on the mat, slowly, using both hands on the surface to push herself upright, a maneuver she'd practiced until it stopped feeling humiliating and started feeling like just a thing her body did. She reached for the wheelchair parked beside the mat and transferred herself with the efficiency of someone who'd stopped making it a performance. The dog watched her the entire time. She noticed that, not in a paranoid way, just noticed it. Most dogs looked away eventually. This one didn't. His amber eyes tracked her movement with a quality of attention that felt different from simple animal curiosity. Not threatening, not quite that, just focused. She picked up her thermos, unscrewed the cap, drank. The dog's nose worked. She glanced at it, at him. He was still watching her. "What's his name?" she asked. She wasn't sure she was asking anyone in particular. Logan Hayes looked at her for the first time. "Rex." "Is he friendly?" "Depends on your definition." "Can I?" "Don't." Not harsh, just flat. She put the thermos down and looked at Rex again. He had a scar on his left shoulder, visible beneath the harness where the fur was shorter there, a pale seam running about 3 inches along the muscle. Combat injury, probably. She'd read enough about MWDs in the last 2 years to know the language of their damage. Then she looked at his front leg, left foreleg, just above the carpus, the dog equivalent of a wrist. There was a scar there too, smaller, older, almost hidden in the fur. She didn't say anything. She looked away, drank her coffee, told herself she was imagining things. The morning she found the puppy, she'd been 20 years old and driving home from a double shift at the grocery store on Route 9, the one with the bad intersection where the gas station light flickered. It was April, cold still, the way Montana April could be. Not winter cold, but the stubborn, lingering kind that came back at night when you thought you were done with it. It was raining. She almost didn't see him. He was off the shoulder of the road, down in the drainage ditch, barely visible against the dark mud. She'd slowed down for the curve and caught him in her headlights for just a second. A small tan and black shape, motionless, eyes catching the light. She pulled over. She didn't think about it. She just stopped the car and got out in the rain and slid down into the ditch and found him there. A German Shepherd puppy, 8 weeks maybe, soaking wet and shaking and too weak to lift his head. His left foreleg was torn. Something had gotten him, a car or an animal or both. And the wound was deep enough that she could see what she suspected was tendon. She didn't look at it for long. She took off her jacket and wrapped him in it and got back in the car. She didn't have a plan. She just couldn't leave him there. She lived in her parents' house at the time, a fact that complicated things considerably. Her father believed pets were an unnecessary expense, and her mother had a complicated relationship with anything that shed. She brought the puppy in through the side door and hid him in her bedroom, toweling him off and pressing a clean cloth against the wound on his leg until the bleeding slowed. He made a sound against her hands. Not quite a whine, more like a question. You're here. Are you staying? She named him Buddy because she was 20 and tired and it was the first word that came to mind, and later she'd think maybe that wasn't such an unsophisticated choice after all. She kept him hidden for 3 weeks. She used money from her tips to buy puppy food, an antiseptic, and gauze. And every morning before anyone else was up, she'd sit on her bedroom floor with him and hold his bad leg steady while she changed the dressing. He bore it without complaint. By the second week, he was eating. By the third, he was following her across the floor in a lopsided gallop, the injured leg favoring but functional, his tail doing a thing that she could only describe as determined. The scar healed clean, small and pale, just above the joint. She'd memorized it without meaning to. She didn't say anything to anyone about the scar on Rex's leg. What would she say? I think your military working dog might be a puppy I rescued 5 years ago and then lost? She understood how that sounded. She understood that German Shepherds were a common breed, that scars were common in working dogs, that the probability calculus of what she was imagining was essentially zero. She told herself that for most of the morning. Rex was situated in the PT wing while Logan Hayes met with the clinic director in the administrative office upstairs. Sandra had explained in the corridor that the commander had sustained a shoulder injury during his last deployment. Nothing structurally catastrophic, but enough to require specific PT under guidance. And that the dog came with him everywhere he went. That the dog was retired. That the dog had his own documented trauma history, and that separation from his handler was not currently recommended. Is he going to be here every day? Tyler asked. For the foreseeable future, Sandra said. The rest of the PT wing's patients handled Rex with varying levels of grace. An older man named Dale, who was there for knee replacement recovery, gave the dog a wide berth and then pretended to be very interested in the window. 2 women who came in together for what appeared to be a group session on gait training whispered to each other and kept glancing over. A man named Garrett, who Amelia had privately categorized over 7 months as the most comprehensively unpleasant person she'd encountered at this clinic, mid-40s, back injury, a contractor of some kind, with the specific brand of dissatisfied energy that came from a man who expected the world to accommodate him and found it frequently failing, looked at Rex, and then looked at Amelia, and then said, loudly enough to carry, "What's that wheelchair chick doing with a war dog?" Amelia was not with the dog. The dog was sitting near her chair because that was where he had positioned himself when his handler left the room, and she had not invited him and had not touched him, and had, in fact, moved her chair slightly to create additional distance. She did not respond. "Garrett," Sandra said in the voice she used when she was 2 seconds from escalating. "I'm just asking," Garrett said, hands up. "Animal's been in combat. You want it sitting next to someone who's going to startle it. I won't startle him, Amelia said. She hadn't meant to say anything. The words came out anyway. Yeah? Garrett smiled in a way that didn't involve his eyes. And how do you know that? Because he sat down next to me. He had options. A short silence. Garrett looked at the dog. Rex was looking at Garrett with an expression of complete professional neutrality that was somehow more unsettling than aggression. Whatever, Garrett said, and went back to his resistance bands. Amelia looked at Rex. Rex looked at Amelia. She looked away first. The situation with the lobby happened at 12:40. She was done with PT for the day, waiting for Gerald and his Country 105 station to collect her, sitting in the lobby with her book open to a page she hadn't actually read in 20 minutes. The waiting area had about a dozen people in it, patients, family members, someone doing paperwork near the window. Garrett came through from the corridor. He had 2 men with him today. Friends or co-workers, Amelia had seen them before, the same category of person, filling the same space in the room the same way. They stood near the entrance together, talking, getting louder. At first it wasn't about her, but Garrett's eye kept finding her the way a bad habit finds you. She could feel it without looking up. "Whole place is like a daycare anymore," one of the other men said. "Half the people in here aren't even trying to get better, just here for the attention." "Some of them," Garrett said. "Yeah." Amelia turned a page she hadn't read. "I mean, what's the point, right? If you can't walk, you can't work. If you can't work—" The man shrugged. The rest of the sentence was understood. She was aware that the room had gotten quieter, that the receptionist was looking at her desk very intently, that Dale near the water fountain had gone still. "She can hear you," a woman across the room said, one of the gate training women from this morning, older with white hair. "Good," Garrett said. Amelia closed her book. She didn't look at him. That was the thing. She had learned over these 7 months that looking at them directly was what they wanted. They wanted the reaction. They wanted to see the cost of what they were doing register on her face, because the registration proved to them that they had power here, that she was lesser and they were not. So she looked at the door. She heard them moving closer, heard Garrett's voice drop into something more personal, more specific, the way these things always eventually did. A comment about the chair, about her looks, about what exactly a woman in her situation expected to accomplish in the world. And then the door from the corridor opened. Rex came through first. Logan was behind him, phone in hand, conversation apparently concluded. But Rex had moved ahead of him, the leash pulling taut, and there was something different about the way the dog was moving now. Not the careful, deliberate walk of a professional animal in a controlled environment. Something more purposeful, more direct. He crossed the lobby in about 4 seconds. He positioned himself in the space between Amelia's wheelchair and the 3 men standing near her, not growling, not showing teeth. He simply stood there. 200 pounds of trained military animal, perfectly still, amber eyes moving from Garrett to the man next to him to the man beyond him with the methodical calm of something that had assessed worse threats than this and found them manageable. Garrett took a step back. Couldn't help it. It just happened. "Rex?" Logan's voice was quiet and even. Rex did not move. "Hey," Garrett said. "Control your—" "Don't finish that sentence," Logan said. Something in his tone, not loud, not heated, just absolutely certain, made Garrett look at him fully for the first time. Really look. The way people sometimes looked at a thing when they finally perceived its actual dimensions. He didn't finish the sentence. Logan crossed the lobby, reached Rex, put a hand on the dog's shoulder. Rex didn't relax. Just acknowledged the touch without releasing his attention from the 3 men. "These gentlemen bothering you?" Logan asked. He was asking Amelia. She looked up at him. He was looking at her with a directness that she hadn't seen directed at her in, she couldn't remember how long. Not pity, not performance. Just asking. "I've had worse mornings," she said. He held her gaze for a beat, nodded. Then he looked at Garrett with an expression that was almost bored. The expression of a man to whom Garrett represented so small a category of threat that assigning significant emotion to him would be wasteful. "We're going to go get lunch," Logan said to no one in particular. And these three are going to make good choices. He turned, started walking toward the exit. Rex turned with him, and then stopped, looked back at Amelia. Logan paused. Rex, come. Rex didn't come. He turned back toward Amelia's chair and took one step toward her, and she didn't know why she did what she did next. She reached down, without thinking, the same instinct that had sent her down into a ditch in the rain 5 years ago, and held out her hand. Rex came to her hand. He lowered his head and pressed his nose against her palm, and then, slowly, pressed his whole jaw against it. The way a dog does when it's not asking anything, just confirming something. You. It's you. She felt the fur under her fingers, the hard ridge of his skull, the warmth, and then she felt the scar. She wasn't looking for it. Her fingers just moved, down his face, down his neck, down his leg, and found it without looking. Small, pale, just above the joint. Her hand went still. Every sound in the lobby went somewhere else. The receptionist's phone, the fluorescent hum overhead, Garrett's voice saying something she didn't register. She turned Rex's leg over slowly. She looked at the scar. Her throat closed around something she couldn't name. Where did you get him? Her voice came out wrong, too quiet. Logan had turned around. He was watching her with a different expression now. Not guarded, exactly, but recalibrated, like something in the room had shifted in a way his training hadn't prepared him for. He was recruited out of a rescue program 4 years ago. They found him as a stray somewhere in Montana, she said. Logan stopped. Route 9, she said. April. About 5 years ago. In a ditch. His leg was... She stopped. Pressed her lips together. There was a wound on this leg. Right here. Her finger traced the scar. Not moving. Just there. The lobby was completely silent. Rex pressed his jaw harder against her hand. Logan's expression had gone very still. Not skeptical. She might have been able to handle skeptical. Something else. Something like a man standing at the edge of a thing he hadn't expected to be standing at the edge of. What did you call him? He asked. She looked up. Before, he said. When you found him. What did you call him? She almost didn't say it. Buddy, she said. Rex lifted his head. He pulled back just enough to look her full in the face, and his amber eyes, those particular eyes that had tracked her across the PT wing all morning, that had watched her transfer from the mat without looking away, that had stood between her and 3 men without being told to. Those eyes did something she didn't have language for. His tail started to move. Not the cautious professional wag of a working animal in public. Something older than that. Something that predated the harness and the training and the combat deployments and all the things that had made him Rex. He remembered. Amelia Carter pressed both hands against the jaw of the dog she had saved from a ditch in the rain. And she did not cry because she was in a public lobby, and she had gotten very good at not crying in public. But the thing that was happening in her chest was large enough that she thought she might need to put it somewhere it would fit. Garrett and his friends were no longer in the room. She hadn't noticed them leave. Logan stood very still near the exit, watching, and his face had the particular expression of a man who had seen a great deal and thought he had a reasonable inventory of the things the world was capable of producing, and was now discovering that his inventory had a gap. Rex stayed. He pressed himself against the side of her wheelchair, his shoulder warm against her armrest, his breathing slow and steady, and he did not move again. Nobody moved for a long moment. The lobby had that particular quality of silence that happens when a room full of people all decide simultaneously to pretend they aren't witnessing something. The receptionist had found something very important to study on her computer screen. The white-haired woman who'd spoken up earlier had gone back to her magazine. Dale, near the water fountain, was examining his paper cup like it contained answers. Logan Hayes stood near the exit with his hand loose at his side and his eyes on Amelia and his dog. And he had the expression of a man doing rapid internal recalculation. Rex hadn't moved. He was pressed against the side of Amelia's wheelchair with his shoulder warm against her armrest, and his tail was still doing that thing. Not the cautious working animal acknowledgement, but something older, something that came from a place before training had taught him to manage his responses. Every few seconds it swept left, then right, slow and deliberate, like a metronome set to a tempo only he could hear. Amelia had both hands on his jaw. She wasn't crying. She had made a decision about crying in public a long time ago, around month 2 of acute rehab, when she'd realized that it made the staff softer in ways that stopped being helpful. The careful voices, the extra pauses, the implicit suggestion that she needed managing. So she had learned to hold things internally until she got somewhere private, and she was holding something very large right now, and it took most of her available processing power. That rescue program, she said. Her voice was steady. She was proud of that. Where was it based? Logan crossed the lobby back toward her. Not fast. He moved through spaces at the same speed regardless of circumstance. She was starting to notice, as if hurrying were a habit he'd trained out of himself. Great Falls. 4 years ago, they pulled him from an open intake. He'd been recovered from... Someone had turned him over to animal control. No history on file. They wouldn't have had one, Amelia said. I kept him off the books. My parents didn't know. Logan crouched down so he wasn't standing above her. She registered that without commenting on it. He put a hand on Rex's back, between the shoulder blades, and Rex's tail continued its slow rhythm. The injury on his leg, it was documented at intake. The vet noted it was an old wound, well healed, said it had been treated by someone who knew what they were doing. I had a first aid manual in YouTube, Amelia said. Something moved at the corner of Logan's mouth. It wasn't quite a smile. It was the shape a smile made before a man who didn't smile much remembered he didn't do that. Still, most people would have dropped him at a vet's and left him. I didn't have the money for a vet. Most people would have left him in the ditch. She looked at Rex. Rex was looking at her with those amber eyes that were doing things she didn't have categories for. I couldn't leave him in the ditch. Logan watched her for a moment, then he stood back up. His files will have the intake date and location. I can pull them. A pause. If you want confirmation. I don't need confirmation, she said. He looked at her. I know that scar, she said. I changed the dressing on it every morning for 3 weeks. I'd know it in the dark. Rex pushed his nose against her palm once, firmly, like punctuation. Logan was quiet for a beat. Then, okay. It wasn't a big word. She wasn't sure why it landed the way it did. Gerald arrived at 1:15, 7 minutes late. Country 105 audible from the parking lot before the van even stopped. Amelia wheeled herself toward the entrance, and Rex stood up and followed her to the door. Still on leash, Logan managing it without apparent effort, but following. At the door, she stopped. Rex stopped with her. She looked back at him. He was watching the van with professional attention, cataloging it, and then his eyes came back to her face the way they kept doing. That specific return, like a compass needle finding north. I'll be back tomorrow, she told him. She wasn't sure who she was telling. She went through the door. The ramp was on the left side of the entrance, a gentle slope to the parking lot that she'd navigated so many times the concrete had started to feel familiar under her wheels. Gerald was already out of the van, pulling the side door open, the lift platform descending. Good session? He asked. Strange day, she said. He held the platform steady while she positioned her chair. Country 105's doing an all-90s Thursday. Garth Brooks until 6. Great, she said. She didn't hear a single song on the drive home. The apartment on Elm Street had been modified before she moved in. Her Aunt Carol had managed it, had hired someone to widen the bathroom door and install grab bars and lower the kitchen counter on one side. It wasn't perfect. The bedroom closet was too narrow, and the shower threshold was still a half-inch higher than it should have been, and the building had no elevator, but the unit was on the ground floor and the entrance had a proper ramp, and that was enough. She made coffee. She sat at the kitchen table that was the right height for her chair, and she looked at her hands. The right one still felt the pressure of Rex's jaw against it, the specific weight of his skull, the texture of the scar under her fingertips, that raised, pale seam she'd watched heal from raw tissue to closed skin over 3 weeks in her childhood bedroom while the rain came down outside and her parents slept 20 feet away. She opened her laptop. She didn't know exactly what she was looking for. She typed military working dog, German Shepherd Rescue Montana, and got nothing useful. She tried MWD training pipeline intake process and read for 40 minutes about the evaluation criteria, the basic training structure, the deployment cycles. She'd read some of this before. In the months after the accident, when reading had been one of the only things her body would cooperate with, she had consumed enormous amounts of material on random subjects, following chains of interest wherever they led. Dogs had been one of them. Working dogs specifically. The mechanics of how an animal learned to trust a handler, and what that trust looked like under pressure, and what it cost both of them. She closed the laptop. She thought about the way Rex had positioned himself between her and Garrett, not on command. Logan had been upstairs. There had been no command. The dog had made a decision, had assessed the room, assessed the vectors, and moved to cover. That was not pet behavior. That was not even basic trained behavior. That was something an animal did when it had internalized a directive so completely that it executed without waiting to be asked. She thought about who had taught him that, and what it had taken and what it had cost him. She thought about a puppy in a drainage ditch in the rain, too weak to lift his head, making a sound against her hands like a question. She went to bed at 9 and didn't sleep until well past midnight. She was at the clinic by 8:40 the next morning. Gerald had been quieter than usual, which she appreciated. The rain had paused overnight and come back around 6, and the streets had that wet black shine that made Willow Creek look more cinematic than it actually was. The storefronts and parked cars all reflected in the asphalt like a second town running parallel below the real one. The lobby was quieter on Fridays. The reception desk was staffed by a different person. A man in his 30s named Phil, who always said, "There she is," when she came in, which she found mildly irritating, but he meant well. "There she is," Phil said. "Morning," she said. She signed in, wheeled toward the PT wing, paused at the corridor entrance because Rex was already there. He was sitting outside the PT wing door with the specific upright posture of a dog that had been told to stay and had decided to upgrade the instruction to something more formal. Logan was not visible. Rex's eyes found her at the end of the corridor and his tail began to move. She came down the corridor, stopped in front of him. "Hey," she said. Rex pressed his nose against her knee. Then he sat back and looked at her with patient attention, the way he did, like she was a situation that required monitoring but not alarm. "Where's your person?" she asked him. "Getting coffee," Logan said from behind her. She turned. He was coming from the direction of the vending alcove, a paper cup in each hand, wearing the same category of civilian clothes as yesterday. Dark cargo pants, a gray thermal, boots. He held out one of the cups. She looked at it. "I have a thermos." "Your thermos is in your bag," he said, "and this is already in my hand." She took the cup. It was black. She didn't ask how he knew. He sat down on the bench along the corridor wall. The bench was there for patients waiting for the PT wing to open. It was 7 minutes before 8, technically, and Sandra wasn't in yet. Amelia stayed in her chair and drank the coffee. Rex positioned himself between them, equidistant, and put his head on his paws. "I pulled the intake files last night," Logan said. She looked at him over the rim of the cup. "Great Falls City Animal Control, October 14th, 4 years ago." He had a phone out. Intake notes. Adult male German Shepherd, approximately 1-year-old at evaluation. No microchip. Documented scar on left foreleg, proximal to carpus. When fully healed, consistent with the laceration treated approximately 6 to 12 months prior. He set the phone down. That would put the original injury around April, 5 years ago. The corridor was quiet. Someone down in the lobby dropped something, a clipboard maybe, and the sound echoed and faded. "Who turned him in?" she asked. Logan's expression shifted slightly. Something careful came into it. "The name on the form is a Raymond Kowalski. Address on Birch Street." A pause. "You know him?" She knew the street. She didn't know the name. "No." He told intake he'd found the dog wandering. No collar. Said he'd had him about a week. Logan set his phone face down on his knee. The intake officer's notes mentioned that the dog appeared well socialized, but was showing signs of, and I'm quoting here, separation distress consistent with recent loss of primary bond. The heat from the paper cup moved through her palms. "He was looking for you," Logan said. Not sentimental, just matter of fact, the way he said most things. like facts were facts and there was no reason to dress them up. He wouldn't have known where to look, she said. I was in Billings. When did you move to Billings? I was already there. I'd been in Billings for about 8 months when the accident happened. I left Willow Creek for a job. He would have... She stopped, reworked the timeline in her head. He would have ended up back at my parents' house. My dad. She said the word with a flatness that wasn't quite neutral. My dad didn't know about him. When I left, he was still hidden. After the accident, I was in ICU, and then I was in rehab, and I couldn't... She stopped again. I lost track. Logan didn't say anything. I thought he'd run away, she said, or that my dad found him, and... She set the coffee cup down on her armrest. I didn't know. Rex lifted his head off his paws and looked at her. He's been with me for 3 years, Logan said. Before that, he was in basic MWD training for about 8 months. Before that, he was in the rescue program's evaluation period. He picked up the coffee, drank, set it back down. 3 combat deployments, Fallujah, Kandahar, and a location I can't tell you about because it doesn't officially exist. How is he? She meant it clinically, or she meant it to sound clinical. He's functional, Logan said, which was clearly the most honest word he could find. He has some noise sensitivity that wasn't there before the 3rd deployment. He's on a reduced work schedule. That's why we're here. The transition to retirement is its own process. For both of you, she said. He looked at her. For both of us. The PT wing door opened. Sandra Reeves came through it, pulling on her jacket, saw them both in the corridor, assessed the scene with the efficient calm of someone who had stopped being surprised by the range of human circumstance her job produced. 8 o'clock people, she said. You're both early. Habit, Logan said. Sandra looked at Amelia. Good night? Productive, Amelia said. In shorts. The problem with Dr. Nathan Holt was that he was technically good at his job. Amelia had learned to navigate around technically competent people who were also condescending because the competence gave them cover. With Holt, it was the particular condescension of a physician who had decided somewhere in his residency that he understood the emotional state of his patients better than his patients did, and that this understanding entitled him to shape what they were told. He was the clinic's rehabilitation medicine specialist. He did a monthly evaluation on each patient's progress trajectory and adjusted the PT plan accordingly. Amelia's evaluation was scheduled for Friday afternoon. She had been through 5 of these. She had not enjoyed any of them. Holt's office was on the 2nd floor, accessible via the elevator that worked about 80% of the time. Today it worked. She went up at 2:15 and waited in the chair outside his office for 11 minutes. She counted because she had noticed that he ran late for her appointment specifically, and she wanted to be precise about it. And then his door opened, and he appeared in it with his reading glasses pushed up on his forehead and a tablet in his hand. Amelia, he said, come on in. His office had a desk that was slightly too large for the room, and framed credentials on the wall and a model of the human spine on the corner of the desk that she privately found oppressive. How are we feeling this week? He asked, settling into his chair. She had been through this enough times to know that how are we feeling was not a question about her feelings. It was an opener that established the register of the conversation, clinical, managed, his frame. She had also learned that matching that register was the fastest way through the appointment. 7 months in, she said, proprioceptive response is improving in the left leg. Sandra has me doing standing framework 3 times a week. He was reading something on his tablet. I see Sandra's notes. A pause. She's got you marked as motivated. The way he said motivated carried something inside it, a small extra weight, like a word being used as a carrier for a different word. Is that a problem? Amelia asked. Not a problem. He set the tablet down, folded his hands. He had the composed, measured delivery of a man who had given difficult news often enough that he'd developed a personal style for it. I just want to make sure we're managing expectations. T6 incomplete. You know the range of outcomes. Some patients see significant functional return. Some plateau earlier than they'd like. I know the range, she said, and you've been doing excellent work. Sandra's notes are genuinely positive. He paused, adjusted his glasses. I want to make sure we're not building toward a goal that becomes a source of distress if the timeline extends. What goal are you referring to? He seemed to choose his next words with care. Walking independently. I know that's the North Star for most patients in your situation, and I want to be clear that we're not ruling anything out. But at the 7-month mark, with your current sensory presentation, I think it's worth having an honest conversation about what recovery might look like if the neural pathway regeneration doesn't progress as aggressively as we'd hope. She looked at him. She was very familiar with what he was doing. She had a clinical name for it now, one she'd found in a paper she'd read around month 4. Anticipatory grief induction, the practice of preemptively walking a patient through the emotional experience of a loss that hadn't yet occurred, framed as preparation, which in practice functioned as a ceiling being installed over the patient's head. Dr. Holt, she said, has Sandra indicated that my progress has stalled? Not stalled, but have my most recent sensory tests shown regression? They haven't, but then I'm going to go ahead and keep my North Star where it is, she said. And I'd appreciate it if you'd update my file to reflect that I've been informed of the range of outcomes and have elected to continue current protocol. A silence. Holt's expression did a specific thing that she recognized. The microcompression of a man who had not expected to be handled and was reorganizing around it. Of course, I'll note it. She started moving toward the door. The dog, he said. I heard there was an incident in the lobby yesterday. She stopped. With the military animal. And some of our other patients. He managed to make some of our other patients sound like a neutral category. I want you to know we take that kind of situation very seriously. Which kind of situation? She asked. Tension? Conflict? It's not a healthy environment for rehabilitation. She turned around. Garrett called me a burden to my face in the waiting room. The dog stood between me and him. I'm not sure what part of that constitutes an incident I need to be concerned about. Holt was quiet. If Garrett's behavior is what's being addressed, she said, I don't have a problem with that process. If the dog's behavior is what's being addressed, he positioned himself between a patient and an aggressive individual without contact, without vocalization, and without any injury to anyone. So I'd also like to understand what aspect of that was problematic. Another silence. Holt put his reading glasses back down over his eyes. We're just monitoring the situation, he said. Great, she said. I'll see you next month. She went back to the elevator, pressed the button, waited. Her hands were steady. Her chest felt like something was sitting on it. Not hard enough to matter, but present. The elevator opened. She went in. Downstairs in the PT wing, Logan was at the end of his session. Sandra putting him through what looked like a cable resistance sequence for the shoulder, Logan moving through it with the focused discomfort of a man who did not enjoy being limited by his own body and was doing something about it. Rex was positioned near the door. He tracked Amelia when she came in. She sat near the window, got out her book, did not read it. After a while, Rex got up and walked over to her. He didn't ask anything. He just stood next to her chair and let her put her hand on his back, and they both watched the rain on the window. Bad meeting? Logan asked from across the room. Monthly evaluation, she said. Holt? You know him? Logan's expression said that he'd been in the clinic long enough to form opinions. He told me Rex was a liability in the clinical environment, first day. What did you say? I said Rex had 3 combat deployments and 4 commendations and had never bitten anyone who wasn't actively trying to kill an American service member. How'd that land? About as well as you'd expect. He rotated the shoulder carefully, grimaced. He backed off. Sandra handed him a resistance band. Again. He did it again. Amelia watched him work. There was something in the way he moved through pain that was different from the way most people in the clinic did. Not absence of pain. She didn't think it was that. More like a negotiated relationship with it. He knew where the edges were, and he worked up to them, and then he backed off and came back, and he didn't flinch, and he didn't comment on it. And she found herself calibrating something against that picture without quite being able to name what she was calibrating. What was the 3rd deployment? She asked. Kandahar. Sandra looked up. Logan was quiet for a moment. Long. You don't have to, It was a 14-month rotation, he said. Extended twice. Rex was with me the whole time. He changed hands on the resistance band. He located 7 IED placements in the first 4 months. Cleared forward positions before entry on... I don't remember exactly. A lot of times. He said it the way he said most things. Without decoration. Like the number was too large to make small by surrounding it with language. Is that where he got the shoulder scar? She asked. Logan looked at Rex. No, that was earlier. He got between me and a guy with a knife in a compound outside Kandahar. Knife was meant for me. A pause. He's fine. Muscle healed clean, but he stopped. He remembers it, Sandra said quietly. Yeah, Logan said. He remembers things. Rex's tail moved once, then went still. Amelia thought about that, about what it meant to be a body that carried its history in specific, located ways. A scar above a joint, a flinch at certain sounds, a decision made in a lobby without waiting to be asked. She thought about the way her own body held the accident, not in the place where the injury was, paradoxically, because that place was mostly quiet now, but in her hands, which sometimes shook for no mechanical reason, and in the base of her throat, which closed when she was not expecting it. He remembered me, she said, after 5 years and 3 deployments and everything. Logan looked at her. Yeah, that's... She didn't finish the sentence because she didn't know how. I know, he said. She looked at her hands. Can I ask you something? Logan said. Me? Sure. The accident. You said you were in Billings. Were you... He stopped. Sorry. That's not... Passenger in a car, she said. Drunk driver. Intersection. She had this down to a sequence of facts she could deliver without much attached to them. 18 months ago. Who was driving? Odd question. A friend. She's fine. Minor injuries. Are you still in contact? She looked at him. Why? He was wrapping the resistance band around his hand, slowly, not looking at her. No reason. I was just... He stopped again. I've got a habit. Gathering information. Occupational hazard, Sandra said mildly. She moved to Portland, Amelia said. It got complicated. After. Logan nodded like he understood something about things getting complicated after, and she suspected he probably did. Rex put his head on her knee. She put her hand on his ear, that specific warm velvet fold of it, and he pressed up against her palm, and his eyes went heavy-lidded, and for a moment the PT wing with its linoleum and its fluorescent lights and its faint antiseptic smell became a place where something very old was being quietly settled between two creatures who had found each other on the wrong side of too much time. Then the door opened. It was Phil from reception. He was holding a piece of paper with the expression of a man who did not want to be the one delivering its contents. Ms. Carter, he said, Dr. Holt asked me to... He wanted you to have this before you left today. He held the paper out. She took it. It was a formal letter on clinic letterhead. She read the first paragraph. Then she read the second. By the third, she had the specific, very controlled sensation of standing at the edge of something that had been coming for a while and had finally arrived. The letter stated that effective the following Monday, her PT sessions would be reduced from 5 days per week to 3, citing, she read the exact phrase twice, progress plateau assessment and resource reallocation in the interest of optimizing patient outcomes across the clinic roster. 7 months in, without a conversation, without warning, without asking her. Logan had stopped moving. He was reading her face. What is it? He asked. She folded the letter precisely in thirds and put it in her bag. Progress plateau assessment, she said. The room went quiet. Rex lifted his head from her knee and looked at the door Phil had just come through, and then back at Amelia, and something in his posture shifted. The same gathering, readying quality she'd watched him move into yesterday in the lobby. He can do that? Logan asked. Just unilaterally? Apparently, she said. She picked up her thermos, screwed the cap on. The motion was mechanical and precise, and used up some of whatever was pressurizing inside her chest. I'm going to need to make some calls, she said. She started moving her chair toward the door, and she was aware of Rex getting up and following her. Not because Logan told him to, because he hadn't, but because Rex had made another unilateral decision in a room where the exits mattered, and his decision, as it had apparently been for the better part of 5 years and 3 deployments and more distance than she could measure, was to stay close to the person who needed covering. The calls took 3 days and accomplished almost nothing. Amelia had made them from the kitchen table of the apartment on Elm Street, in the evening, with the overhead light on and her coffee going cold beside her laptop. She'd called the clinic's patient advocacy line, a recording, call back within 5 business days. She'd called the main administrative number and been transferred twice before reaching a woman named Denise, who was very sympathetic and completely unable to help. She'd looked up the Montana Department of Public Health and Human Services complaint process, which involved a form, a waiting period, and a review timeline of up to 90 days. 90 days. She set her phone down and looked at the ceiling. The letter had been precise and bureaucratic and insulated from argument by its own language. Progress Plateau Assessment. The phrase was designed to sound clinical, objective, like something produced by measurement rather than decision. She understood the mechanism. Holt had built a frame around her progress and then pointed at the frame and called it evidence. 3 sessions a week instead of 5 meant slower recovery. Slower recovery would eventually confirm the assessment. The assessment would then justify further reduction. She understood it. That didn't mean she could stop it. What she had, practically, was 2 options: find a different clinic or fight the decision through channels that moved at a speed that would make the fight irrelevant before it concluded. There was a third option that she didn't spend much time on, accepting it, but it kept appearing at the edges of her thinking the way things did when you were tired enough. She was tired enough. On Sunday evening, Carol came over. Carol was her mother's younger sister, 61, a former ER nurse who had retired early due to a back problem of her own and now made and sold handmade quilts online and kept a kitchen garden and had the particular brand of steady, practical love that Amelia had come to depend on in ways she rarely said out loud. She brought soup and bread from the bakery on 5th and sat across the kitchen table and listened to the whole situation without interrupting. When Amelia finished, Carol said, "What does your PT say?" "Sandra can't countermand Holt. He's above her in the structure." "What does Sandra say off the record?" Amelia was quiet for a moment. She said she didn't agree with the assessment. "That's something. It's not enough." Carol tore a piece of bread, ate it. "And the man, with the dog. Logan. What does he say?" Amelia had not told Logan about the calls. She'd told him about the letter on Friday afternoon in the corridor of the PT wing, and he'd listened with that particular quality of attention he brought to things. Fully present, nothing filtered out. And then he'd said he was going to make a call of his own, and she'd told him not to, and he'd looked at her in a way that suggested he'd heard her and would make his own determination on the matter. "I don't know what he's doing," she said. Carol handed her the soup. "Eat." She ate. "He came back, Amelia," Carol said. She looked up. "The dog." Carol was looking at her with the calm, clear gaze of a woman who had spent 20 years in emergency rooms and had developed an economy with sentiment that made the sentiment she did express carry significant weight. "After everything, he came back." "That's not exactly— I know it's not a plan. I'm not saying it's a plan." Carol folded her hands around her own bowl. "I'm saying it's something, and you should let it be something instead of reducing it to a logistics problem." Amelia looked at the soup. "I'm not reducing it. You've been on the phone for 3 days trying to build a case file. Someone has to." "Yes," Carol said, "and it'll keep for tonight." Monday came with hard frost and a sky the color of old pewter. Amelia arrived at the clinic at 8:40 as she always did. Gerald had been quiet again, which she appreciated. The frost had whitened the parking lot, and the ramp had a thin skim of ice that she navigated carefully, testing her front wheels before committing her weight. The lobby was already populated. Phil at the desk, a few patients in the waiting chairs, the vending machine humming its quarterly complaint. Rex was in the corridor. He was sitting outside the PT wing the way he had been on Friday morning, upright and formal, but this morning there was something different in his posture. a readiness that hadn't been there before, or that she hadn't been tuned to notice. His ears were slightly forward. His eyes found her at the lobby entrance and held. Logan was on the bench. He had 2 paper cups. She came down the corridor. "I told you I have a thermos," she said. "You do," he said. "And yet." He held out the cup. She took it. "What did you do?" "I made a call." "Logan, to the clinic director, not Holt, Marlene Cheever." She stopped. "Cheever runs the whole facility." "Yes, she's above Holt." "By 2 levels, Logan said. She looked at him. "What did you say?" "I said I was a patient here, and that I had concerns about the quality of care being provided to another patient, and that those concerns were specific and documented, and that I would like an opportunity to present them in a formal review context." He drank from his own cup. "I also mentioned that I had previously worked in environments where documentation of procedural irregularities tended to move quickly once the right people were paying attention to them." "Did you threaten her?" "I stated facts. The conclusion she drew from them was her own." Amelia looked at the ceiling. "Logan? She's meeting with you at 10. She brought her eyes back down. "What?" "She called me back Saturday afternoon. The meeting is at 10. Her office, 3rd floor. He set his cup down on his knee. "You can be angry about it later. For right now, you need to know what you're walking into, and I have 40 minutes to get you ready." She stared at him. Rex put his nose on her knee. "He agrees," Logan said. She looked at the dog, then back at Logan. "I don't need you to. I know you don't need me to." He said it straightforwardly, no edge in it. "You've been handling this alone for 7 months, and you've been handling it well. I'm not suggesting otherwise." A pause. "I'm suggesting you don't have to handle this particular thing alone, and that there's a difference between not needing help and not taking it when it's available." A long moment. "What do I need to know?" she said. He reached into the side pocket of his cargo pants and produced a folded sheet of paper. "Sandra gave me her session notes from the last 3 months. Off the record. Every measurable marker, proprioceptive response, voluntary motor activation, standing tolerance. They're all trending positive. Some of them are trending significantly positive." He held the paper out. "Holt's assessment conflicts with Sandra's documented findings. That conflict is either an error or a decision. Either way, Cheever needs to hear it from you directly." She took the paper, read it. She was familiar with most of the numbers. Sandra had shown her versions of these findings in session, but seeing them arranged this way, in sequence, with the trend lines visible, it was different. It was a rebuttal. It was exactly the kind of document that could not be answered with progress plateau assessment. "She documented all of this?" Amelia said. "Sandra Reeves has been a PT for 26 years, and she knows what she's looking at," Logan said. "She also knows what it looks like when an assessment doesn't match the data." Amelia folded the paper, put it in her bag. She was aware of something realigning inside her. Not hope exactly, because she'd learned to be careful with hope, but something structural. A correction. "Thank you," she said. He nodded once. "Don't do it again without asking me first," she said. "Understood." Rex's tail moved. Chet. The meeting with Marlene Cheever lasted 47 minutes. Cheever was a small woman in her early 60s with silver hair cut practically short and reading glasses she kept taking on and off with the focused energy of someone who processed information at a speed that most rooms couldn't keep up with. Her office on the 3rd floor had a window that looked out over the parking lot and the ridge beyond it, and she sat behind a desk that was covered in organized stacks of folders in a way that suggested a system only she fully understood. Holt was there, too. She hadn't expected that. She should have. Of course Cheever would have told him, but she hadn't anticipated sitting across from him in the same room, and the first 30 seconds were a recalibration exercise she managed with varying success. Holt sat to the side, slightly back from the desk, with his tablet on his knee and his expression carefully neutral. He looked like a man who had been asked to attend a meeting and had decided correctly that the best strategy was to occupy as little space as possible. Cheever did not waste time. "Ms. Carter, I've reviewed the letter Dr. Holt sent on Friday. I've also reviewed Commander Hayes' concerns, and I've looked at your session history. Tell me what you want to tell me." Amelia told her. She was precise and specific, and she did not editorialize. She laid out Sandra's documented findings against Holt's assessment. She described the timeline, the letter arriving without a prior conversation, without a formal review meeting, without any documented process being followed. She was careful with her language. She did not say "he wants me gone," even though that was the sentence that lived underneath everything else she said. She let the documents do it. When she finished, Cheever looked at Holt. Holt said, "The assessment is a clinical judgment. I stand by the methodology." "Your methodology conflicts with Sandra's documented findings," Cheever said. "Sandra is a PT. Her scope includes measuring the exact markers you claimed had plateaued," Cheever said. Her tone hadn't changed. It didn't need to. "Can you walk me through the specific data points you used?" A pause. "Not long. Long enough. I can prepare a detailed response. I'd like to hear it now." The specific data points, it emerged over the next 12 minutes, were thinner than the letter had implied. Holt's assessment had weighted a single evaluation session over Sandra's cumulative 3 months of data. There was no written protocol requiring that. There was no documented rationale for the weighting. There was, Cheever noted at one point, looking at her screen, no second opinion obtained before the letter was issued. Holt was not a stupid man. He knew what was happening. He didn't fight it. He retreated into procedure, into language about individual physician authority and clinical judgment, which were real things that carried real weight. Cheever knew that too. The meeting was not going to produce a reversal on the spot. That wasn't how these things worked. But at the end of it, Cheever put her glasses back on and looked at Amelia and said, "Your sessions will continue at 5 days per week, pending a formal review of the assessment protocol. That review will include Sandra Reeves and an independent evaluator. It will be completed within 30 days. Amelia said, "Thank you." She was out of the elevator and back on the ground floor before she let herself breathe all the way out. She told Logan in this parking lot beside Gerald's van. He listened, nodded. 30 days is enough time for the independent eval to confirm what Sandra's numbers show. "Yes," she said. "Holt's going to be careful now. He knows someone's watching." "That's all I needed," she said. "Just someone watching." Rex sat beside her chair in the wet cold of the parking lot, pressed against her wheel, and Logan stood with his coffee and the frost-whitened asphalt around them, and the ridge in the near distance that was just beginning to catch the first angle of the late morning sun. "Why did you do this?" she asked. He considered the question with the seriousness it apparently deserved. "Because it was the right call," he said. "You didn't know me 3 days ago. I knew enough." She looked at him. He looked at Rex. "He made a judgment call in that lobby. I trust his judgment." A pause. "Most of the time." Rex looked up at Logan with the expression of a dog that was aware he was being discussed and had opinions about it. She almost smiled. Bad. The week moved differently after that. Not faster, not easier, but differently. The way terrain changes when you know someone is watching the perimeter. She still went through the same motions. Gerald in the country station, the ramp, the lobby, the PT wing, Sandra, and the exercises that were still hard and sometimes dispiriting and always exhausting. But something had shifted in the geometry of the place. Holt passed her in the corridor on Tuesday and said nothing, which was not unusual, but the texture of his silence had changed. The reception staff were slightly, almost imperceptibly, warmer. Phil said, "There she is," at the same volume, but with a different energy behind it. Sandra, for her part, said nothing about the meeting. She did, however, add 15 minutes to their standing frame session on Wednesday, and when Amelia said her legs were shaking, Sandra said, "Good," in the tone of someone who had been waiting to be allowed to push harder. Rex was in the wing every day. He had settled into the space with the ease of an animal that had decided somewhere in his operational history that the best way to function in a new environment was to understand it completely, and he had applied that approach to the Bridger Rehabilitation and Recovery Center with thoroughness. He knew where Sandra kept the resistance bands. He knew which patients were nervous around him and gave them extra distance. He knew that the vending machine made a specific sound at 11:15 when it cycled, and he knew it was not a threat. He had also developed what appeared to be a particular opinion about the PT wing's linoleum floor. He preferred the section near the window, where the light came in, and he returned to it between sessions with the deliberateness of a being executing a personal preference. He stayed near Amelia when she was in the building. Not always close. Sometimes he was across the room, or out in the corridor, or sitting near Logan during the shoulder sessions. But she was aware that he was always positioned such that if she moved, he could track her. And that awareness did something she couldn't fully articulate, filled in a kind of peripheral silence that she hadn't noticed the shape of until something had moved into it. On Wednesday afternoon, she stayed late. Sandra had gone. Logan had finished his session and was in the administrative wing for something. Amelia was doing a solo standing frame set. She had a protocol she could run independently, basic weight-bearing practice, and she preferred to do it alone when she could, because the quality of her concentration was different without an audience. She locked her chair, positioned the frame, got her hands on the bars. The first 2 repetitions were standard: controlled rise, hold, controlled descent. Her left leg, which had been the more responsive since the early months, cooperated. Her right leg, which had its own timeline and didn't consult her about it, offered approximately 60% of what she asked of it. The 3rd repetition she held longer, counted out a 30-second static stand, feeling the complex negotiation between the frame and her arms and her nervous system and gravity, which remained entirely indifferent to anyone's recovery goals. On the 4th repetition, something different happened. It started in her left foot, a sensation that she had been chasing for 7 months, the way you chase something in peripheral vision, always slightly off to the side, always disappearing when you looked directly at it. Pressure. Not pain. Pressure, like the floor was pushing back against her foot, like there was a conversation happening between the sole of her shoe and the surface beneath it. She'd had hints of this, fragments. She had learned to be careful about them, to note them and report them to Sandra, and not build anything too heavy on them because the nervous system at T6 incomplete was not a reliable narrator. But this was longer than a fragment. She stood there in the empty PT wing with the gray afternoon light coming through the window and held the sensation for as long as it lasted. 43 seconds. Then it faded. She got back in her chair. Her arms were shaking. She'd been on the frame longer than she'd intended. She sat there breathing and looking at the floor, and she did not perform any particular emotional response to what had just happened because she was alone and there was no performance required, and what she actually felt was something too specific and too large and too fragile to be handed a name right now. Rex appeared in the doorway. He crossed the room and sat in front of her chair, put his chin on her knee, looked up at her. "Hey," she said. His tail moved once. "I felt it," she said. "Just for a minute." His chin pressed slightly heavier on her knee. A response. She put her hand on his ear, the warm velvet fold of it. She had been doing this for days now, reaching for this specific texture the way other people reached for a phone or a familiar mug, something that occupied the hand when the mind was working on something else. "Don't tell him," she said. Rex looked at her. "I mean it. Not yet." He made a low sound in his throat. Not quite a word. Something that occupied the space where a word would go. She was still sitting there when Logan came back. He read the room the way he read most things, quickly, without announcing it. He looked at her face, and then at Rex, and then at the standing frame, which was still positioned where she'd left it, and something moved in his expression that he didn't comment on. "Done for the day?" he asked. "Yeah," she said. He called Rex with a gesture, and Rex got up, but he put his nose on her hand first before he moved. One firm press. She kept her hand open after he stepped away. But Thursday morning, the situation with Garrett came back. She had not thought about him much since the lobby. He was there in the clinic. She was aware of that. She saw him in the corridor sometimes, and he always looked somewhere else now, which was its own kind of acknowledgement. But he was not, she had decided, someone she needed to allocate significant attention to. She revised that assessment at 9:15. She was in the PT wing doing a mat session with Sandra. Logan was in the secondary room off the main wing, a smaller space used for individual sessions, with Rex. The main wing had several other patients, Dale with his knee, a teenager in a neck brace working with one of the junior PTs, and two people she didn't know well doing upper body work near the window. Garrett came in at 9:15 with a different energy than usual. She noticed it peripherally, the way he moved through the door, the set of his shoulders, the specific expression on his face that was not the usual dissatisfied performance, but something more pressurized. He had a support brace on his lower back, which was standard, and he went to his usual area near the cable machines, and for the first few minutes it was normal. Then he started talking. Not to her. He wasn't even looking at her. He was talking to one of the men doing upper body work nearby, a man she'd seen him talk to before. Similar category, similar frequency. The conversation was low but not quiet, with a particular volume that was calibrated to carry. Whole review thing is a joke. Cheever doesn't know what she's doing. Holt's a good doctor, and they brought in some outsider who's never been in a clinic context. The man said something she couldn't hear. Just because she made a complaint, and now everyone has to deal with Sandra's hand on her shoulder. Not pressure, just contact. Don't. Amelia focused on the exercise. Whole vibe of this place has changed since the wheelchair got here. She heard Sandra take a breath, saw Dale across the room set down his resistance band with a controlled deliberateness. Garrett, Sandra said. Her voice was level and final, and she did not look up from what she was doing. That's your first warning. I'm having a private conversation. You're having it at a volume that guarantees it isn't private. A brief silence. Then Garrett said, lower. Whatever. It didn't stop. It just went underground. Muttered, angled away, plausibly deniable. She caught fragments. Situation. Special treatment. Dog in a medical facility is already insane. She stopped trying to hear specific words and focused instead on Sandra's voice, counting through the exercise and the feeling of the mat under her palms and the work in her arms. Then the door to the secondary room opened. Rex came out first. He had heard something. That was the only explanation. His hearing was acute and he had been in the building long enough to catalog the acoustic signatures of the main wing, and something in the room's sound profile had reached him through a closed door and told him something was wrong. He stood in the doorway, ears forward, amber eyes moving. They found Garrett. They moved to Amelia. They moved back to Garrett. Logan appeared behind him in the doorway. He assessed the room in approximately 3 seconds. Amelia could see the calculation happening, not visible in his expression, which remained even, but in the adjustment of his posture, the small shift of his weight. Rex, he said quietly. Rex did not move toward anyone. He went instead to the center of the room and sat down. Precisely in the middle of the space between Amelia's mat and Garrett's station. He sat with the upright formality of a dog that had decided that presence was sufficient, and he looked at nothing in particular, and he was 200 pounds of trained military animal, positioned such that everyone in the room was acutely aware of where he was. The room went quiet. Logan came in and sat on the bench near the door. He did not say anything to Garrett. He did not say anything to anyone. He sat with his elbows on his knees and watched the room with the same professional attention he brought to every environment he occupied. Garrett's conversation had stopped. She kept doing the exercise. Sandra counted. The junior PT on the other side of the room resumed working with the teenager in the neck brace. Dale picked his resistance band back up. For 12 minutes, nothing happened. Then Garrett, collecting his gear to leave, walked past the mat where Amelia was working. He stopped. She could see his feet, the specific planted stance of a man deciding whether to say something he'd been suppressing. You think this changes anything? He said. She looked up. His face was controlled, but just. You think getting Cheever involved, getting your Navy buddy to make calls, you think that fixes anything? His jaw was tight. You're still in that chair? That's not changing. The room was very still. Rex turned his head and looked at Garrett. Logan, on the bench, looked at Garrett. Dale looked at Garrett. Sandra stopped counting. Amelia held Garrett's gaze. She was aware of her own heartbeat. The thing that was happening in her chest was not what she might have predicted. It wasn't anger exactly, or at least not only anger, it was something cleaner than anger, something that came from the place where you stop defending and start knowing. You're right, she said. He blinked. I'm still in this chair, and in 45 minutes I'm going to wheel it out to that parking lot and go home and be back tomorrow, and the day after. She held his gaze. And you're going to keep coming in here with that same brace and that same bad back and that same everything. And nobody's fixing anyone today. So, a long silence. Something moved in Garrett's face that she had not seen there before. Not softening, nothing as clean as that, but a fractional disorientation, like a man who had brought a specific tool for a specific job and found the job had changed shape. He left. Nobody said anything for about 30 seconds. Then Dale said from across the room, "Well," and somehow that was exactly right. The single word dropped into the silence like a stone into water, and the rings from it moved out to the edges of the room, and then it was just a Thursday morning in a PT wing with the frost on the parking lot outside the window starting to melt in the late morning sun, and Sandra's voice picking the count back up where she'd left it. Rex walked back to his spot near the window. Logan was looking at Amelia with an expression she hadn't seen on him before and couldn't fully read. Not impressed. That wasn't quite it. Something more like recognition, like a man who had looked at a thing from one angle for several days and had just understood what he was actually seeing. She went back to the exercise, her arms held. Her left foot, against the mat, was doing something. She didn't say anything. She breathed through it. She counted with Sandra. She felt the pressure, real, insistent, specific, against the surface beneath her, and she held it inside herself like something that hadn't happened yet, like something that needed more time before it could be what it was. 41 seconds, then 42. Then Sandra's voice. "Amelia." She looked up. Sandra was looking at her legs. Her face had the specific quality of a clinical professional encountering data that reorganizes the frame. "Your right foot," Sandra said. Amelia looked down. Her right foot was pressing against the mat. Not fully, not a clean movement, but pressing. Her toes curled slightly against the surface, the tendon along the top of her foot raised, the ankle making a minor, fractional, imperfect, completely unmistakable adjustment. It stopped after a moment. But it had happened. Logan stood up from the bench. Rex lifted his head. Sandra took her glasses off and put them back on and pulled out her phone and opened her documentation app with the precise movements of a woman making sure she captured what had just happened before the atmosphere in the room made her doubt it. "I need to document this right now," Sandra said, and her voice was completely steady and gave nothing away, except that her hands were moving slightly faster than usual. Amelia looked at her foot. The PT wing was quiet around her, the frost outside dissolving into the morning, and the weight of 7 months and 47 minutes with Cheever and 3 days of phone calls and one lobby and one ditch in the rain all sat somewhere just behind her sternum. Not resolved, not finished, not anything as simple as that, but present, real. She pressed her foot against the mat again. Nothing. She waited. She pressed again, and the floor pushed back. Sandra documented it in real time, thumbs moving across her phone screen with the focused precision of someone who understood that the window between an event and its official existence was narrow and needed to be closed immediately. "Voluntary motor activation, right ankle dorsiflexion," she said aloud as she typed it, the clinical language landing in the room like something solid. "Duration approximately 4 seconds. Repeatable." She looked up. "Do it again." Amelia looked at her foot. She pressed. The floor pushed back. The toes curled. The tendon rose along the top of her foot in that fractional, imperfect, entirely real way. Sandra typed faster. Logan was standing near the bench with his arms crossed and his weight forward on the balls of his feet, which she had come to recognize as his version of attentiveness. The body position of a man whose default state was operational and who expressed interest through readiness rather than leaning in. Rex had gotten up from his spot near the window and walked to the edge of the mat, where he stood watching her foot with the same focused attention he brought to everything he monitored. "How long has this been happening?" Sandra asked. "Yesterday," Amelia said. "In the standing frame. I wasn't sure it was real." Sandra looked at her over the top of her phone. "Why didn't you tell me?" "I'm telling you now." "Yesterday, Amelia. I didn't want to report something that wasn't reproducible." Sandra made a sound that was not quite agreement. She typed another line. "Right. Okay. The standing frame session yesterday. How long did the sensation persist? 43 seconds, the first time. 43. Sandra stopped typing. Looked at her. That's not a fragment. That's not a flicker. 43 seconds of sustained proprioceptive return is... She stopped herself. Put the phone down. Picked it up again. I need to call the independent evaluator today. Not in 30 days. Today. The review is already scheduled. I'm moving it up. Sandra was already scrolling. This changes the documentation profile entirely. If we have voluntary motor activation in the right ankle on top of the left leg's proprioceptive progression, the 30-day review becomes a formality. But I need it on record now before... She stopped. Before Holt sees it, Amelia said. Sandra looked at her. Say it, Amelia said. Before anyone has a reason to contextualize it differently than what it is, Sandra said. Carefully. They both understood what that meant. Logan uncrossed his arms. Is there a scenario where Holt tries to reframe this? There's always a scenario, Sandra said. That's why I'm documenting it right now in front of 2 witnesses. She looked at Logan, then at Amelia. You're both going to sign this session note when I'm done. Fine, Amelia said. Fine, Logan said. Rex sat down on the edge of the mat. His tail moved once. Him too? Logan asked. He can't sign, Sandra said. She was already typing again. But I'm noting his presence. The independent evaluator's name was Dr. Patricia Voss, and she arrived on Tuesday. She was not what Amelia had expected. She'd constructed a mental image, older, institutional, the particular manner of someone brought in to validate a predetermined conclusion, and Voss was none of that. She was 40-something, direct, with the efficient affect of a clinician who found small talk wasteful and had organized her professional life accordingly. She had done her residency at UCSF, ran her own spinal cord injury practice in Missoula, and had a publication record in neurorehabilitation that Sandra had shown Amelia on Friday with the expression of someone presenting useful ammunition. Voss spent 2 hours with Amelia on Tuesday morning. She did not ask about the conflict with Holt. She did not ask about Rex or Logan or the lobby incident. She asked about the injury, the acute care period, the rehabilitation timeline, and then she did her own evaluation. Systematic, unhurried, starting at the extremities and working inward, asking Amelia to attempt specific movements and rating the results on a scale Amelia recognized from her early months in acute rehab. At the end of it, Voss sat back in her chair and looked at her notes and said, "You've been doing this 5 days a week for 7 months." "Yes," Amelia said, "and the current recommendation is to reduce to 3. "That's what the letter says." Voss was quiet for a moment. "The right ankle activation Sandra documented on Thursday. Show me." Amelia showed her. It took 3 attempts before it was reproducible, which was frustrating, but Voss watched all 3 attempts with the same level of attention and said nothing until it happened the 3rd time. "There," Voss said. "There," Amelia said. Voss made a note. T6 incomplete with this level of voluntary motor return at 7 months on an aggressive daily protocol. Reducing to 3 sessions is contraindicated. She said it without inflection, like she was reading a measurement. The neural pathway work your body is doing right now requires consistent input to consolidate. You interrupt that schedule and you're not just slowing progress, you're potentially losing ground that took 7 months to gain. "Can you put that in writing?" Amelia asked. "That's why I'm here," Voss said. The review meeting was Thursday afternoon. Cheever had arranged it in the main conference room on the 2nd floor, a room Amelia had never been in that turned out to be a long table with 8 chairs and a whiteboard and a view of the same parking lot that Cheever's office faced. Voss was there. Sandra was there. Holt was there, with a folder that he'd set down on the table in front of him, with a deliberateness that communicated something about how he felt the meeting was going to go. Amelia was there. Logan was in the waiting area downstairs with Rex because the meeting had not extended to him. This was her meeting, her record, her argument. And she had told him that on the way in and he had said, "I know," and found a bench. Cheever opened it. She ran it the way she apparently ran everything, efficiently, without preamble, with the particular authority of a woman who had been managing competing clinical opinions for long enough that she had no patience for the performance of objectivity when actual objectivity was available. Voss presented her findings. 12 minutes, documented, sourced, referenced against current literature on T6 incomplete recovery trajectories. She did not recommend a specific protocol. That wasn't her role, but her findings made the shape of an appropriate protocol unmistakable. Then Holt spoke. He had prepared. She gave him that. He had organized his position carefully, led with his clinical authority and years of practice, and made an argument that was coherent on its surface. The core of it was that Voss's evaluation, while thorough, was a single-day snapshot, and that his assessment had been based on a longer observational period. He used the word trajectory several times. He talked about resource allocation. He talked about patient outcomes at the population level. He did not address the specific data points Cheever had asked him about in the first meeting. She noticed that. When he finished, Cheever looked at Sandra. Sandra walked through her session notes. She didn't editorialize. She didn't look at Holt. She presented the numbers in chronological order and let them build their own argument, which they did, steadily and without room for interpretation. Then Cheever looked at Amelia. "Ms. Carter, anything to add?" "One thing," Amelia said. She had not prepared a speech. She'd thought about it. Carol had offered to help her draft something. Logan had offered the same thing with a different style, and she'd declined both. What she had instead was a set of facts she'd been carrying for 7 months, and she arranged them now the same way Sandra had arranged the session notes, in order, without decoration. "When I came to this clinic in April," she said, "I had incomplete voluntary sensation below T6 and no reproducible motor activation below the injury level. 7 months later, I have progressive proprioceptive return in the left leg, documented voluntary motor activation in the right ankle, and a standing tolerance that has improved by approximately 300% since month 1. She looked at Holt. "None of those outcomes happened because I was managed carefully. They happened because I was pushed consistently. Reducing my protocol now isn't conservative medicine. It's the opposite of what the data recommends, and everyone in this room knows it." Holt's expression did not change, but something behind it did. A fractional withdrawal, the look of a man updating his assessment of what he was dealing with. "I'm not asking for special treatment," she said. "I'm asking for the protocol the evidence supports." Cheever looked at her notes for a moment. Then she looked at Holt. "Nathan, do you have a documented clinical rationale for the reduction that isn't addressed by Dr. Voss's evaluation?" A pause. "I maintain that clinical judgment, documented," Cheever said. "Specific. In writing. Something I can attach to this file." Another pause. Longer. "I can prepare by end of day Friday," Cheever said. "If I don't have it, the reduction is reversed and the current protocol continues pending the 90-day review." She closed her folder. "We're done." Well, Amelia was in the elevator when Holt caught up with her. She hadn't heard him behind her teeth. The elevator doors were already beginning to close when he put his hand on the frame to stop them, and she was already in the car, and for a moment, they were just the two of them in a small metal box going nowhere. "Miss Carter," he said. "Dr. Holt." He stepped in, let the doors close. The elevator began to descend. He was looking at the floor indicator above the doors, not at her. "You handled that well," he said. She waited. "I want to be clear about something," he said. "My assessment was not—" He stopped, reorganized. "I have 46 patients in this facility. The resource allocation question is real. It's not personal." "I know resource allocation is real," she said. "Then you understand us." "I understand it was my sessions being reallocated," she said. "And I understand that the assessment used to justify it didn't match the data. Those two things can both be true." He was quiet. The elevator reached the ground floor. The doors opened. "Will you have the documentation by Friday?" she asked. He looked at her for the first time since they'd been in the elevator. His expression was difficult to read. Not hostile, not apologetic, somewhere in between. A man who had been a clinician long enough that his face had learned to present a version of neutrality that covered a range of actual states. "Probably not," he said. The doors began to close again. She put her hand out and stopped them. "Okay," she said. She wheeled out into the lobby. He stayed in the elevator. Phil looked up from the desk. "There she is." "Phil," she said. "Good meeting?" "Getting there," she said. Logan was on the bench where she'd left him, Rex beside him, both of them watching the lobby with the patience of beings that had learned to wait without making the waiting into a problem. When she came out of the elevator, Logan read her face and nodded once. An acknowledgement, not a question. "Protocol continues," he said. "Friday's the deadline for his documentation. He told me he won't have it. So it's done." "The immediate thing is done," she said. "The 90-day review is still happening. Holt's still here. But you've got Voss's eval on file and Sandra's notes, and a documented outcome that contradicts the assessment." "Yes." Logan leaned back against the wall. Rex stood up and came to her chair. "Voss? Was she good?" "She was very good." "What did she say about the ankle activation?" Amelia looked at her hands. "She said it's the kind of marker that, in her experience, tends to indicate that the recovery trajectory is steeper than the imaging predicted." She paused. She said she'd seen it before, in patients who'd been doing exactly this kind of consistent daily work. Logan was quiet for a moment. "Steeper than predicted," he said. "She was careful. She didn't make specific promises." But she said I should keep going," Amelia said. "Every day, same intensity." She looked at Rex. She also said, and this is the part Sandra was very interested in, she said she wanted to follow the case, personally. She asked if she could consult monthly. "She wants to follow it," Logan said. "Apparently T6 incomplete with this recovery profile at 7 months is..." Her word was notable. Rex pressed his nose against her palm. "Okay," Logan said. He stood up. "Then that's what we do." It struck her, not for the first time, the way he said "we." Not as an assumption of permission, more as a statement of fact, the way he stated most things. Like the decision had been made somewhere prior, and this was simply the report. She didn't correct it. "I want to ask you something," she said. He looked at her. "The shoulder," she said. "How is it?" "Actually." A small pause, long enough to mean something. "It's functional." "That's what you said about Rex last week." "Yeah." He looked at the exit, back at her. "It's about 60% of where it was before, maybe 65. He said it with the flat honesty of a man who had been trained to accurate damage assessment and applied it to himself with the same discipline he applied it to everything else. The surgeon said 75 to 80% is the realistic ceiling with PT. Timeline is 6 months to a year. And after that? He was quiet. "The field," she said. He looked at the middle distance. "I don't know yet what that looks like." The words came out slower than his usual pace. Not reluctant exactly, but considered, like he was speaking them into a form while he said them. 3 deployments and a shoulder that tops out at 80%. The Navy makes its own calculations about that. "Are you afraid of what the calculation will be?" He looked at her directly. "Yeah," he said, without hesitation, like it was just another fact. She respected that more than she could easily say. "Rex's retirement is 6 weeks out," he said. "Official. After that, he's a civilian. After that..." He stopped. Rex looked up at him. "I'm figuring out what comes next. With a 65% shoulder. With a 65% shoulder and a retired MWD and the rest of it." He said the rest of it the way people said things that had too much inside them to inventory right now. She understood that. "Can I ask you something else?" she said. "You've been asking me things all week." "I know. One more." He waited. "The compound in Kandahar," she said. "The one where Rex got the shoulder scar." His expression didn't change. It became more still, which was different. "You don't have to..." "He moved before I knew there was someone in the room," Logan said. "We'd cleared the first 2 rooms. 3rd room, I was on point, Rex behind me. Standard stack. I breached right, checked my sector, and I was moving to the center when Rex broke protocol. Went left, hard, fast, without a command. I spun around and there was a man in the corner who'd been completely silent, and Rex had already..." He stopped. The knife was in Rex's shoulder. Rex had already neutralized the threat. He looked at the dog. I didn't even see the guy. Silence. He saved my life, Logan said. Not dramatically, just clearly. I know, she said. You saved his. He looked at her. She looked at Rex. Rex was looking at Logan with patient amber eyes, and she thought about what it meant to be a creature that made those specific decisions. To break protocol. To go left without a command. To absorb what was meant for someone else. And then to carry that history in a scar on a shoulder, and a noise sensitivity in the left ear, and the specific untrainable instinct to stand between people you had decided to cover and anything that was coming for them. He figured it out, she said. What? That they're the same thing, she said. Saving and protecting. He doesn't distinguish. Logan looked at her, then at Rex. Then back at her, and the expression on his face was the one she'd seen last Thursday in the PT wing, the recognition, the recalibration, but clearer now, less new. Rex stood up and walked between their chairs and sat with his shoulder against the wheel of her chair and his flank against Logan's leg, and he looked at the lobby with the professional calm of a being that had completed an operation and found the outcome satisfactory. Che, Sandra called on Friday morning at 7:43. Holt didn't submit documentation, she said. I know, Amelia said. She was already dressed, coffee already made. Cheever confirmed 20 minutes ago. Protocol continues 5 days a week. The 90-day review will proceed as a formality. A pause. Dr. Voss called this morning, too. She wants to schedule monthly consults through the end of your first year. Amelia was quiet for a moment. Amelia, I'm here. You understand what this means? The ankle activation, the proprioceptive progression, Voss wanting to follow the case personally. I understand. I know it doesn't mean anything certain. I know that. She held the coffee cup. Outside the window on Elm Street, the frost was doing its morning thing. The parked cars whitened over, the light coming in low and sharp from the east. It means I keep going. Yes, Sandra said. That's exactly what it means. She hung up, finished her coffee, got her bag, wheeled to the door. She paused before she went out. She pressed her right foot against the floor. She held it there. The floor pushed back. She went out into the cold. Gerald was already in the lot, the van idling, Country 105 at its standard volume. He held the platform steady without being asked. She got on. He raised it. Cold one, he said. Yeah, she said. You doing okay today? She thought about it. Getting better, she said. He nodded. Got back in the driver's seat, pulled out of the lot. She watched Elm Street go past the window. The dry cleaners, the bakery on Fifth, the hardware store with its hand-lettered sale signs in the window. And she let herself feel the motion of the van, the specific vibration of it through the frame of her chair, and the morning cold that was already beginning to give at the edges as the sun came up over the ridge and started its slow work on the frost. Her phone buzzed, a text from Logan. Rex is already at the door. You're late. She looked at the time. 8:38. She texted back. I'm never late. The clinic opens at 8:45, 3 dots. Then, he disagrees. She put the phone in her bag. For the first time in longer than she could pinpoint, she was not thinking about the chair, or the assessment, or the 90-day review, or the ceiling that someone had tried to install over her head and that she was in the process of methodically removing. She was thinking about a dog sitting at a door, waiting. She was thinking about how that was its own kind of answer to a question she hadn't known she was asking. Rex was sitting at the clinic entrance when Gerald pulled into the lot. Not inside the glass doors, outside on the concrete apron at the top of the ramp, in the cold, with his breath making small clouds in the morning air. He was upright and formal the way he got when he was waiting for something specific. And when the van pulled in, his head turned and tracked it across the parking lot with the precision of an animal that had cataloged the sound of Gerald's engine sometime in the previous 2 weeks and filed it under relevant. Amelia saw him through the window and felt something move in her chest that she didn't examine too closely. Logan was inside the glass doors, visible through them, coffee in hand, watching Rex watch the van with the expression of a man who had stopped being surprised by his dog and had arrived somewhere past that. A place that looked like appreciation. Gerald lowered the platform. Your welcoming committee is outside, he said. I see him. Dog like that waiting on you in the cold. He shook his head, not negatively. That's something. She wheeled off the platform. The cold hit her, sharper than it had been, the temperature having dropped overnight into the low 20s, and the ramp had been salted, which she registered with the automatic gratitude of someone for whom an unsalted ramp was not an abstract inconvenience. Rex came down the ramp to meet her. Not running. He didn't run toward people. It wasn't how he moved. But purposefully, closing the distance between them with the deliberate efficiency of everything he did. And when he reached her, he put his nose against her hand once, and then turned and walked beside her up the ramp toward the door. She put her hand on his back. They went in together. You were outside, she said to Logan. He was outside, Logan said. I was inside where it's warm. You let him go outside alone? He opened the door. She looked at Rex. The handle's a lever, Logan said. He figured it out about 3 weeks ago. I've been choosing not to address it. Rex sat down beside her chair with the expression of an animal that had no comment on the matter. Good morning, Sandra said, coming through from the corridor with her own coffee and the brisker-than-usual energy she'd been carrying since Thursday. Big day. Is it? Amelia said. Voss is coming in at 11, and Cheever wants a brief update meeting at 2. Sandra paused. Also, Holt submitted a memo this morning. The lobby was quiet for a moment. What kind of memo? Amelia said. The kind where he cites scheduling constraints and patient load and formally requests to be recused from your case going forward. Sandra's voice was professionally neutral. Cheever approved it this morning. Amelia looked at the floor. Processed that. So he's no longer your supervising physician. Correct. Sandra held her coffee with both hands. Dr. Anita Flores will be taking over your case. She's good. She's very good, actually. She and Voss know each other. Holt had found his exit and taken it. That was what had happened. He'd looked at the documentation on the table and the independent evaluator and the trajectory that the next 90 days was clearly going to produce, and he'd decided that the calculation no longer favored him, and he'd moved accordingly. It wasn't an apology. It wasn't accountability in any form she could hold on to. It was just absence. The space where a problem had been. She wasn't sure how she felt about that. She sat with it for a moment and found that what she mostly felt was tired. Not the tired of defeat, but the tired of having carried something heavy for a long time and being told she could set it down now, which was its own kind of exhaustion. Okay, she said. Okay, Sandra said. Rex pressed against her wheel. The session that morning was different, not in the exercises. Sandra ran the standard protocol. The mat work and the standing frame and the resistance sequences that Amelia had done so many times she could have recited them in her sleep. What was different was the quality of attention in the room. Sandra had always been good, precise, honest, consistent, but this morning there was something additional, a focused intensity that communicated itself through her hands and her voice, and the extra half-second she held each measurement before moving on, like she was witnessing something she wanted to record accurately. The ankle activation was reproducible 4 times in the first hour. The left leg's proprioceptive return was consistent through the standing frame sets. At the end of the second hour, Sandra had Amelia attempt something they hadn't tried before. A single-leg weight-bearing assessment, left side, with the frame for safety, measuring how much load the leg could sustain and for how long. It wasn't much. It was imperfect and uncomfortable and lasted about 20 seconds before her body called it done. But it was something that hadn't existed at 7 months minus 2 weeks, and Sandra documented it with the same rapid focus typing she'd used Thursday. And when she finished, she looked at Amelia with the particular expression of a clinician who was working very hard to remain clinically calibrated about something that was making it difficult. Don't say it, Amelia said. I wasn't going to say anything. You were. I was going to say that at this rate, the 90-day review is going to be a very different conversation than the one Holt was preparing for. Sandra set her phone down. That's a clinical observation. It's also the other thing. Yes, Sandra said. It's also the other thing. Rex, who had been in his spot near the window for most of the session, got up and walked to the mat and stood there looking at Amelia's feet with an expression of focused attention. like he was monitoring the data himself. He keeps doing that, Sandra said. I know. Does he understand what's happening? Amelia looked at Rex. His amber eyes came up from her feet to her face and held there. I think he understands more than the categories we have for it, she said. Sandra was quiet for a moment. That's either profound or you've been spending too much time with him. Both can be true, Amelia said. Amisid. Voss arrived at 11 with a laptop bag and a directness that immediately made the room feel organized. She sat up at the table in the PT Wing's consultation corner and went through Sandra's updated documentation with the focused efficiency of someone reading a report they'd been waiting for, asking occasional precise questions, making notes. When she finished, she looked at Amelia across the table. I want to be careful with you, she said. Okay. That means I'm not going to tell you what I think the 12-month picture looks like because I've been wrong about 12-month pictures before and I don't want to build you something you'll have to tear down later. Voss folded her hands. What I will tell you is that the markers we're seeing are the right markers. The ankle activation, the proprioceptive return, the standing tolerance improvement. These are the specific indicators that, in the literature and in my own practice, correlate with continued trajectory. A pause. Not certainty. Correlation. I understand the difference, Amelia said. Good. Some patients don't want to hear it. They want the promise. Voss looked at her steadily. You don't seem like a promise person. I'm a data person. I know. That's why I took the case. Voss opened her laptop. I want to talk about what the next 3 months look like. Specifically, I want to introduce some additional components to your protocol that Sandra and I have already discussed. They spent 40 minutes on it. Specific exercises, specific progressions, a schedule for the monthly consult sessions, metrics they were tracking, and thresholds that would trigger reassessment. Voss was systematic, and Amelia matched her register, asking specific questions, pushing back on 2 items where she wanted clearer rationale, and Voss gave it without defensiveness. Just pulled the evidence and laid it out. At the end, Logan knocked on the doorframe of the consultation corner. He was holding paper cups. He looked at Voss. Commander Hayes, Voss said. Dr. Voss. He looked at Amelia. Going okay? Going well, Voss said, which was the first time Amelia had heard her use that word. Your dog's been staring at my laptop for 20 minutes. He's interested in screens, Logan said. We don't know why. Rex, who was in fact sitting near Voss's laptop with his nose angled toward it, turned his head and looked at Logan with the dignified expression of an animal whose motivations were his own business. The 2 o'clock meeting with Cheever was brief. Cheever had clearly already processed everything that needed processing. Holt's recusal, Flores taking over, Voss's evaluation, the updated documentation, and the meeting was less a discussion than a formal acknowledgement that the situation had resolved in the direction the evidence had indicated it would. Your protocol is reinstated at full schedule, Cheever said. Dr. Flores will introduce herself tomorrow. The 90-day review will proceed as planned, and based on Dr. Voss's assessment, I expect it to be straightforward. She paused. I want to apologize for the letter. Amelia looked at her. The process should have included a face-to-face conversation before any written communication, Cheever said. That's a gap in how we handled it, and I take responsibility for that. It was direct and unhedged, and she made eye contact through it. It won't happen that way again. Thank you, Amelia said. Is there anything else you need from me? She thought about it. No, she said. I have what I need. She found Logan in the corridor afterward, Rex beside him, both of them apparently waiting in the way they did, without agenda, without impatience, just present. Well, he said. Protocol reinstated. New doctor tomorrow, Voss monthly. She paused. Cheever apologized. He raised his eyebrows slightly, that was all. Yeah, she said. They went down in the elevator together. Rex sat in the elevator with the specific tolerance of a dog that had accepted elevators as a category of thing that happened and had no further opinion on them. In the lobby, she stopped. I want to ask you something, she said, and I want you to answer it honestly. Have I answered you any other way? No, that's why I'm asking. She looked at him. Rex's official retirement, 6 weeks. When that's done, what are you actually planning? He was quiet for a beat, longer than usual. I have terminal leave coming, 8 weeks after the retirement date. After that, I haven't decided. Back to the Navy? I don't know yet if they'll take me back at field capacity. And if they won't? He looked at the lobby, the reception desk, Phil, the vending machine, the motivational posters peeling at the corners. He looked at it like a man looking at a place that had become, without his planning it, part of his daily structure. I don't know, he said. I'm still figuring out what I'm worth at 65%. She looked at him steadily. You're worth exactly what you are right now. The 65% is just where the shoulder is. It's not where you are. He looked at her. I would know, she said. I've been having that specific argument with myself for 18 months. A pause. Something in his face, that careful, armored face that had spent 3 deployments learning not to give anything away, moved in a way she hadn't seen before. Not breaking, nothing as dramatic as that. More like a wall acknowledging that there was wind. Yeah, he said. Yeah, she said. Rex looked between them and then put his head on Amelia's knee with the authority of an animal, concluding a discussion. 6 weeks went by the way time did when you were doing work that mattered, not fast or slow, but full, each day having enough substance to it that you could feel it when it was done. Rex's official retirement date was a Thursday in late December. There was paperwork. Logan had explained the process with the slight discomfort of a man describing something that was functionally a grief, even if he didn't use that word. Rex's service record was formally closed. His military identification was transferred to a civilian equivalent. He was no longer an active duty military working dog. He was, as of 9/14 on a Thursday morning, a civilian animal with a documented service history and 3 combat commendations and a scar on his left shoulder and one on his left foreleg, both fully healed, both permanent. Logan drove to the clinic that morning instead of walking. He sat in the parking lot for about 5 minutes before he came in, which Amelia knew because she could see the parking lot from the PT wing window, and she'd been watching. When he came in, Rex was in his harness still, the tan tactical rig, the pouches, the handle. Logan had said he'd keep it on for the last day. Old habit, maybe, or something more than habit. Sandra noticed. She didn't say anything about it. She just ran the session the way she always ran it, and Rex sat in his spot near the window, and the morning went on. At 11:15, Logan unclipped the harness. He did it in the corridor, outside the PT wing, with the quiet deliberateness of someone performing an action that deserved to be done deliberately. He unclipped the buckles one by one and folded the harness over his arm, and Rex stood there and let it happen, and then shook himself once, a full-body shudder from nose to tail, the physical expression of a new state, and looked up at Logan. Logan put his hand on Rex's head, held it there for a moment. That was all. Amelia watched from the doorway. She didn't say anything. Some things didn't need commentary. The conversation happened that evening. She'd stayed late. The standing frame session had gone long, and Voss had called with a question about the data from the afternoon. And by the time she was done, the clinic had emptied out, and the lobby lights were on their evening setting, lower, the parking lot outside going dark in the early December dusk. Logan was in the PT wing with Rex when she came back in from the corridor. He was sitting on the bench, and Rex was beside him, unharnessed, and there was something different in the quality of the silence between them that she recognized from the way she'd heard veterans sometimes talked about transitions, the specific silence of a door that had just closed behind you. She sat in the middle of the room and didn't say anything for a while. "How are you?" she said finally. "I don't know yet," he said. "That's honest." "You asked for honest." Rex got up and crossed to her chair. He put his head in her lap. Not his chin on her knee, his whole head, the full weight of it, the way he did when he wasn't asking for anything, just claiming proximity. She put both hands on his ears. "He's yours," Logan said. She looked up. "I mean, I want him to be, if you want that." He was looking at Rex, not her. "He was yours first, and he stopped, reorganized. "He covers you differently than he covers me. He always has. I noticed it the first day. pause. I think he's been waiting to get back to this job since he lost it. She looked at Rex. Rex's amber eyes were closed, his breathing slow, the full weight of his head steady in her lap. The warmth of him moved through her hands and into her arms and settled somewhere central. You'd be giving up your dog, she said. I'd be giving him to the person he belongs with. Logan looked at her directly now. And I'm not going anywhere. I haven't decided anything about the next 6 months, but I'm in Willow Creek through at least spring. He paused. So, she said. It's not really giving him up, he said. It's more like He stopped again. He wasn't good at the sentence, she could see that. The articulation of something that had emotional components, which was not his strongest terrain. It's more like he's completing a mission. Rex opened one eye, looked at Logan, closed it again. Okay, Amelia said. Okay? I'm keeping his name, she said. Rex, Logan said. Good name. It's a good name. She felt the weight of his head in her lap and thought about a different weight. A small, wet, shivering weight in a drainage ditch in April. A puppy that had asked a question with its eyes and gotten an answer it hadn't expected. She thought about what had happened to that answer in the years between, how it had moved through rescue programs and training facilities, and forward operating bases, and Kandahar compounds, and 3 combat deployments, and a lobby in Willow Creek, Montana, carrying the original question all the way through. You're here. You're here. Are you staying? She stayed. January arrived with 2 feet of snow and a cold that locked the valley in for 3 weeks and made the drive to the clinic an exercise in patience and 4-wheel drive. Gerald switched to a different van with better traction without being asked. Amelia started keeping extra gloves in her bag and a small ice scraper attached to the side of her chair for the ramp, which still got icy despite the salt, because Montana in January operated on its own terms. Rex had a winter coat. Logan had ordered it without mentioning it, and it had appeared one Tuesday morning, a quilted black vest that fit over his broad shoulders and chest, with a handle on the back for the occasions that required it. Rex had tolerated the fitting process with stoic dignity and then worn the coat everywhere, including, on one memorable occasion, into the grocery store on Main Street when Amelia had stopped there on the way home and Rex had apparently decided that entry was non-negotiable. Nobody at the grocery store said anything. She suspected the coat helped. Also Rex's expression, which remained professionally neutral at all times regardless of context. The 90-day review was completed the second week of January. Dr. Flores had attended with Voss and Sandra had presented the accumulated documentation, and the independent evaluation had confirmed what the session notes had been building toward for 3 months. The standing tolerance was at 4 minutes sustained. The ankle dorsiflexion was consistent and reproducible. The proprioceptive return in the left leg had progressed to the point where Sandra had begun introducing balance board work, which was not a thing she introduced to patients who weren't ready for it. Flores had read Voss's summary and looked at Amelia and said, "Doctor, Holt's assessment was incorrect. Not his methodology was flawed or the data presents a different picture. Incorrect. Clean and clear." "Yes," Amelia said. "I want to continue at the current intensity and add the balance work formally to your protocol." Flores had a directness similar to Voss's, warmer in temperature but equally precise. "And I want to talk about a 6-month milestone evaluation. Not to make promises, Besson, but to establish a formal baseline for where we're headed." "What baseline are you thinking?" Amelia asked. "Assisted ambulation," Flores said. "Parallel bars, bracing, full support. Whether that's a goal that's achievable by month 13 depends on a lot of variables we can't control, but I think it's a goal worth having on the table." The room was quiet. Sandra was looking at her notes. Voss was looking at her laptop. Neither of them was looking at Amelia, which she suspected was deliberate, giving her room to have whatever reaction she was going to have without an audience for it. What she had was not a reaction she had a name for. It wasn't joy, exactly, or relief. It was something more structural than that, something that rearranged rather than arrived. Like a room she'd been living in for a long time, suddenly having a window she hadn't known was there. "Okay," she said, "let's put it on the table." She told Logan that evening. They were in the parking lot after a late session, which had become a habit. The slow decompression before Gerald arrived, the cold air and the parking lot lights, and Rex moving between them in the casual way he did when he was off duty, investigating the lot's perimeter with the professional interest of a being who never fully clocked out. "Parallel bars," Logan said. 6 months. Maybe. A lot of variables. But they're talking about it. They're talking about it. He was quiet for a moment. The parking lot light caught the frost on the asphalt, making it bright. Rex came back from the perimeter and sat between them. "How do you feel about that?" Logan asked. "Terrified," she said immediately. "And, I don't know, the other thing." "Yeah. I've been in this chair for 18 months, parallel bars in 6 months. Even if it works, that's not the end of anything. That's just the next thing," he said. "The next thing," she said, "and then the thing after that. For a long time, probably." "Yeah," he said, "that's how it works." She looked at him. "Is that how it's working for you?" He'd had 2 pieces of news in the last week that he'd told her about separately. With the matter-of-fact delivery, he gave all information. The shoulder was at 70%, ahead of the projected timeline, which the surgeon had attributed to the PT, and what she suspected was also Logan's specific relationship with physical discipline. And the Navy had sent a letter, a formal letter, the kind that required a response, asking him to consider a training and assessment role at a facility in Virginia, attached to the MWD program there. It wasn't the field, but it was the work. "I'm thinking about it," he said. "Virginia's not Willow Creek." "No," he said. "It's not." Rex looked up at him, then at her, then back at the middle distance, where something had apparently captured his professional attention. "I told them I need 60 days, Logan said, to make a decision." 60 days is spring," she said. "Yes." She looked at the ridge, dark against the sky. "It's a good opportunity. It's a complicated opportunity. Those are sometimes the same thing." He looked at her with the specific directness he'd had since the first day, that quality of actually looking, not performing looking. "Yeah," he said. "I'm figuring that out." Rex stood up and pushed his shoulder against Amelia's wheel, which was the gesture she'd come to understand meant enough of this. "Let's go." She put her hand on his back. 60 days, she said. 60 days, he said. Morn. Spring came late to Willow Creek. The snow in the valley held through most of March, and the clinic parking lot was a muddy disaster for 2 weeks in April while the frost worked its way out of the ground. The ridge turned green from the top down, which was backwards from how she'd always thought of seasons moving, but it was apparently the elevation doing it, the warmth hitting the high ground first and working its way toward the valley. She was at the parallel bars on a Tuesday in the second week of April. It had taken 11 months total. 1 month past the 6-month milestone Flores had put on the table, which Flores had noted without apology was still ahead of most projections for a T6 incomplete at her level of function. The bars were in a dedicated room off the main PT wing, a small room with a mirror along one wall and mats on the floor, and the specific energy of a space where effort happened. Sandra was on her left. Flores was on her right. Rex was at the end of the bars, sitting, waiting, with the particular quality of attention he brought to things he had decided were important. Logan was in the doorway. She'd asked him not to be in the room. She wanted fewer people, fewer variables, fewer eyes. He'd accepted that with a single nod and taken his position in the doorway, which was technically not in the room, and she had decided not to argue the distinction. She positioned her hands on the bars. She'd done this in simulation, had practiced the grip, the angle, the weight distribution, but simulation was a different conversation than the real thing, and the real thing was telling her clearly how much it intended to require from her. Her arms were strong. 7 months of pushing her own wheels had made them strong in specific ways, and the standing framework had built on that, and she was as prepared for this as 11 months of preparation made a person, which was not the same as ready. "Take your time," Sandra said. She pressed. The world reorganized around a new axis. Her arms took the load first, both hands on the bars, elbows finding the angle, shoulders locking into the position she'd practiced. Then her hips, rising from the chair, the motion controlled and deliberate, and expensive in a way that made every other thing she'd done in the last 11 months feel like a negotiation with a body that was now honoring the negotiation. Her feet found the floor, both of them, at the same time, with the weight of her on them, partial, supported, imperfect, real. She stood, not fully upright. Her posture needed the bars. Her legs were shaking. Her right ankle was making its own decisions about how much it wanted to cooperate, and it was a somewhat inconsistent partner. She was tilted slightly left. Sandra's hand was at her elbow, not supporting, just present, a contact point, but she was standing. The mirror showed her a woman she didn't entirely recognize, not because she looked different, but because the angle was. The elevation. She was used to seeing the world from a position that the world was not designed for, that required constant navigation, that produced a specific and exhausting gap between what was and what was built for someone else. And now she was at a different height, and the mirror showed her at a different height, and the room looked different, and she understood, in a way she hadn't been able to understand until she was inside it, how much that gap had cost. Sandra said, 10 seconds. Count with me. She counted. Rex, at the end of the bars, was perfectly still. Not the professional stillness of a working dog in a neutral environment. Something else. A quality of attention so focused it was almost visible, like something in him was counting too. 10 seconds. She sat back down. Her arms were shaking. Her legs were shaking. She was breathing like she'd run a mile, which was an absurd physiological response to 10 seconds of standing and also completely accurate. Good, Sandra said. Just that. Flores made a note. We'll build from here. Amelia nodded. She didn't trust her voice right now, not because she was going to cry, though she was in the vicinity of it, but because what was in her chest was large enough that it needed some time before it would fit through a sentence. Rex got up from the end of the bars and walked to her. He put his head in her lap. The full weight of it, the way he always did. Not asking, not offering, just claiming the proximity that he had apparently decided somewhere between a drainage ditch and a lobby and 11 months of PT was where he was supposed to be. She put her hands on his ears. Logan was in the doorway. He was not doing anything dramatic. He was standing there with his arms at his sides and his face doing the specific thing it did when he was feeling something he didn't have operational vocabulary for, which she had learned to read across the months as its own kind of eloquence. 60 days were up 3 weeks ago, she said. They were, he said. Virginia. I told them I needed more time. She looked at him. Logan? I know. It's a good opportunity. I know that too. He came into the room, sat on the edge of the mat. Rex turned his head to look at him and then turned it back to Amelia. I called them last week, asked if the position was still open. She waited. It is, he said. They said they'd hold it through summer. Through summer, which gives me time to see how the next phase goes. He said it with the careful, qualified precision of a man who had learned the hard way not to promise outcomes he couldn't guarantee. Yours and mine. She understood what he meant by both. That's not a plan, she said. No, he said. It's a direction. Rex's tail moved. The program started with a phone call to Carol in May. Amelia had been thinking about it since February. Not planning exactly, more like a shape slowly assembling itself from available materials. Carol had listened to the whole idea on the phone with the quiet, focused attention she brought to things that mattered. And when Amelia finished, there was a pause, and then Carol said, You need a space. I need a space, Amelia said. The old Mitchell building on 4th. Ground floor's been empty for 2 years. I know the building. I know the owner. The program didn't have an official name until June. It operated in the first months out of a single ground floor room in the Mitchell building with donated folding chairs and a borrowed mat and a schedule that ran Tuesday and Thursday afternoons. It was not, Amelia was careful to clarify from the beginning, a medical program. It was a peer support and resources group, connecting people with disabilities navigating the rehabilitation system with information, advocacy, and each other. The first session had 7 people. 2 were former clinic patients she'd met at Bridger. One was a man Carol knew from her quilting group whose wife had had a stroke. Two were people who had found the flyer she'd posted at the library. One was Sandra, who came not as a clinician but because she wanted to, and sat in a folding chair and listened. One was Dale. He came in with his knee brace and his paper cup of coffee and sat in the corner and said nothing for the first 40 minutes. And then, when someone in the room said they were afraid their doctor wasn't actually listening to them, said, "You have to make them listen. You have to say specifically what you need, and then not let them change the subject." Amelia looked at him across the room. He shrugged. Learned that the hard way. Rex was at her side throughout. Not a service animal now, Mbasse. Not officially, not in the working sense, but present in the way he'd been present since the beginning, positioned with the quiet authority of a being that had decided the space required monitoring and had assumed the role without waiting to be assigned it. She had not, she would tell people later, planned any of this. She had not planned the program, had not planned the clinic fight, had not planned for a retired military dog to walk into a PT wing and remember her from a ditch in the rain. Plans were different from directions. Directions were different from decisions. What she had decided, somewhere in 11 months and parallel bars and 43 seconds of felt pressure against a floor, was that the specific knowledge she'd accumulated about navigating systems, about advocating for yourself when the system would rather you didn't, about what it cost and what it built, was not knowledge that should stop with her. She didn't have a theory about that. She just had the Tuesday and Thursday sessions, and the folding chairs, and the donated mat, and Rex at her side, and the slowly growing list of people who had found their way to the ground floor of the Mitchell building because they needed to be in a room where someone understood the specific weight of what they were carrying. Logan came to the third session. He sat in the back. He didn't say anything. At the end, when people were getting up and gathering their things, he caught her eye across the room and nodded once. The acknowledgement, not the question, the expression of a man who had assessed something and found it confirmed a prior judgment. Afterward, in the parking lot, he said, "You're good at this." "I don't know what I'm doing," she said. "Nobody does at the start." He held both coffees, handed her one. That's not the same as not being good at it. Rex was investigating the parking lot's eastern boundary with professional interest. "Virginia called again," Logan said. She looked at him. "I'm going to give them an answer by August," he said. "Whatever the answer is." "Okay," she said. "Okay," he said. They stood in the parking lot in the early June warmth, the valley finally green, the ridge catching the last of the afternoon light, and Rex came back from the perimeter and sat between them and looked at nothing in particular, and the three of them were quiet for a while in the way that required nothing from any of them. She thought about a rainy roadside and a drainage ditch and a small wet shape in the beam of her headlights. She thought about a lobby and a corridor and a letter on clinic letterhead and 43 seconds of floor pushing back against her foot. She thought about parallel bars and a mirror and the world seen from a different height, and about what it meant that it had taken all of those things together, not any one of them, all of them, to arrive at this particular parking lot on this particular evening. You didn't get to choose the things that shaped you. You got to choose what you did with what they made. Rex pressed his shoulder against her wheel. She put her hand on his back. The light moved down the ridge. To everyone watching this story from wherever you are in the world, whatever weight you're carrying right now, whatever room you're in that wasn't built for you, whatever voice has told you that your timeline is too slow or your ceiling is too low, the floor pushes back. Not always when you want it to, not always the way you expect, but if you keep showing up, if you keep pressing, it pushes back. And sometimes the thing that remembers who you are walks back to you through a door you stopped expecting to open. Don't stop showing up.